A couple of days back, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs, Demeke Mekonnen, has disclosed that Ethiopia upholds an irreversible stance on ensuring accountability on those suspected of violations of human rights. This was disclosed on a meeting held in the office of the Deputy Prime Minister between European Union Commission for International Cooperation, Jutta Oppilainen, and representative of the Commission for the Horn of Africa, Dr. Annette Weber. The Deputy Prime Minister told the delegation that Ethiopia has conducted a joint investigation into the violation of human rights by the Office of the Attorney General in cooperation with the United Nations International Human Rights Commission. Deputy Prime Minister Demeke confirmed that Ethiopia holds an unswerving stance on making the violators of human rights accountable before the courts of law. He noted that recently some international organizations and foreign-based media outlets are attempting to spread misinformation regarding law enforcement measures taken by the government among the international community of nations. He said they were working on gathering one-sided information with the objective of tarnishing the image of the country. The Deputy Prime Minister added that media outlets have gone far enough to make Ethiopia wrongly accountable for the violations of human rights during the law enforcement measures taken by the government to ascertain the rule of law in Tigray region. He recalled that most inhuman and heinous massacre was conducted on the midnight of November 4, 2020, on the northern command of the Ethiopian Defense Forces, who were shedding their blood not only for the country but also for the peace in Africa. The Deputy Prime Minister said some international organizations and media companies were dead silent and refrained from condemning the actions conducted on restive defense forces in the region. He mentioned that the government was forced to embark on law enforcement measures as a result of the bloody massacre conducted on the army officers stationed in the Northern Command in Tigray. During the period in which law enforcement measures were taken, the government enforced legal measures on terrorist TPLF criminals and their leaders who organized and coordinated and committed criminal acts and betrayal and brought them before the courts of law. The Deputy Premier noted that instead of investigating and assessing the nature of the betrayal and criminal acts perpetrated by the terrorist organization, a considerable number of international organizations, media companies resorted to disseminating unverified false reports. They organized a protracted campaign of misinformation trying to depict that all members of the Ethiopian Defense Forces have participated in the violation of human rights and crimes against humanity. Ethiopia has invited African institutions of human rights as part of its strong commitment to the resolution of the issue by investigating into the truth about the human rights violations that were allegedly conducted by the National Defense Forces of Ethiopia to clarify the actual incidents and also ensure that the perpetrators are taken to the courts of law. The Deputy Prime Minister recalled that on his speech at the summit of the African Peace and Security Commission conducted on March 9, 2020, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has offered that Ethiopia is ready to work in coordination with the Commission in conducting investigations into human rights violations allegedly conducted by members of the National Defense Forces of Ethiopia. He said that the Premier offered for cooperation with the Commission in view of the country's commitment to resolving the African problems by the Africans themselves. Moreover, Deputy Prime Minister stressed that same position in his discussion with the AU Commission Moussa Faki on March 11, 2020. Based on the recommendations of the Premier, the African Human and People's Rights Commission tasked itself to starting the investigation. Furthermore, the United Nations Human Rights Commission and the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission are also engaged in joint investigation into the possible violations of human rights in Tigray. Incidentally, what has the African Human Rights and People's Rights so far done on the invitation offered to it to work on the investigation in coordination with the Human Rights Commission? Now, some local sources reportedly indicate that the African Human and People's Rights Commission has one-sided stance on the original proposal made to coordinate the investigation in coordination with the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission and has been engaged in unilaterally conducting its own investigation without notifying the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission. Such a unilateral approach contravenes with the proposal made by Ethiopia to conduct joint investigations by the African Human and People's Rights Commission. Apart from violating the sovereignty of Ethiopia, such approach contradicts with the African Charter for investigating violations of human rights. Article 46 of the Charter forbids the conduct of investigation into human rights violations on its own and on its whims and desires. By way of discharging its responsibilities, the Commission is expected to work in coordination and cooperation with pertinent regional and international organizations. Furthermore, according to the Charter, the Commission is expected to work in cooperation and coordination with Ethiopian Human Rights Commission and duly refer any obstacles or hindrances it may encounter to the African Union Peace and Security Commission. Sources close to the issue indicate that the Commission has so far been working on its own and showed no interest in working with the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission, nor did it report to the AU Commission if there is any cause for its inability to work with the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission. This indicates that the Commission wants to investigate possible violations of human rights in Tigray only by itself and on its own accord. Mr. Mansour Gabayo, human rights professional and director of Association of Ethiopian Human Rights Organizations, told the Ethiopian news agency that the nonchalance of the international human rights organizations to work with local counterparts in investigating human rights violations has now become a hurdle to effectively conduct investigations into human rights violations. He added that such unilateral approach to investigate human rights violations becomes a cause of concern, which will lead to one-sided conclusions and resulting to distorted interpretation of facts on the ground. This happens when such organizations deliberately fail to comply with the laws and regulations that they themselves have helped to compile. The fact that the organization has chosen to conduct the investigation only through its own desires and approaches defied the tacit agreement that Ethiopia has reached with the African Union Commission. It's not only against the cardinal principles of resolving African problems by the Africans themselves, but also disregards the sovereignty of Ethiopia. This will cause a question and legal issues to crop up not only on the mode of the investigation by the Commission, but also on the credibility of the approach itself. According to the information from our sources, the procedures employed by the Commission completely defies the provisions explicitly provided in the Charter of the Commission. Moreover, Article 46 of the Charter of the Commission clearly indicates that procedures to be followed should include collection of primary information pertaining to investigation, consulting with major partners and stakeholders in a balanced manner, conducting field investigation on violation of human rights and other pertinent steps and procedures related to the process of investigating the violations on human rights. If the investigation by the Commission does not include prompt cooperation and joint involvement from the Ethiopian side, conclusions could only be made by relying on simply available information. Our sources indicate that investigations conducted on alleged violations of human rights in Tigray could be based primarily on virtual information sources. In addition, our sources noted that the field investigations are based only on information gathered from residents of Tigray found in the refugee camps in Sudan. How can the results of investigations conducted in such manner be credible and trustworthy? Mr. Mansour noted that if the procedures and modalities of the investigation are not acceptable, the authenticity and legality of the report and the conclusions could not only be illegal but also invalid. Basing investigations on unfounded false allegations on the social media outlets that are marred with fake false stories which show violations of human rights in Ethiopia would certainly incur high level of legal accountability. It is therefore important to first gather primary level evidences and information pertinent to the investigation. If this is not accomplished in a legally acceptable manner, there is a greater chance of drawing up wrong conclusions and hurriedly post the results on social media outlets. How can an investigation conducted from far distance become credible and trustworthy? Mr. Massoud inquired. The mere fact that international human rights organizations have shown no interest in investigating human rights violations in Afar and Amhara regions and restricting their investigation only in Tigray, as if no violation of human rights have been conducted in the two regions, shows marked political implications on the motives of the investigation itself. The human rights researcher recommended that Ethiopian government should seek for prompt rectification of the investigation and corrections in the procedures of investigation through pertinent diplomatic channels. If this is not the case, how can the African Human and People's Rights conduct an investigation on violations of human rights without consulting and cooperating with all stakeholders to the issue? This is the question for all of us.